Welcome back. You're watching HFO-TV.
Welcome back to HFO-TV. I'm Greg Frick, partner at HFO Investment Real Estate, and today we're lucky to have Patrick Quinton, CEO of Dweller Company. That's a group here in Portland in the ADU business, which we've all heard a lot about in the last couple of years in terms of different cities trying to work on how do we get more affordable housing in these hot coastal cities for the most part. So yeah, thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Maybe you can give a little background on kind of your history and here in Portland, and then we'll kind of get into the ADU business.
Yeah, so I currently the CEO of Dweller, partner, and I co-founded it a few years ago. But prior to that, I was the executive director of what's now called Prosper Portland. Used to be the Portland Development Commission,
Right.
The primary development entity for the city of Portland. I did that for about 5.5 years, and then prior to that, I'm banking and
So you've
commercial
been in
finance.
the development side
I have.
in Portland for
So and I've seen it from the public and the private side.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what pushed, what drove you to, look at the ADU kind of model as an option, or, what got you excited about getting involved in this?
Well, when I left government, I was looking to do something on the private side that would prove out a model to help add more housing. I thought that we obviously have needs across the spectrum, but we need a variety of private sector solutions in addition to government programs. But I didn't at the time know that I didn't know enough about the ADU market to really appreciate it as a big enough opportunity. But as I looked into it and my business partner brought the idea to me, I said, this is actually much bigger than people realize, but you need a business model that can scale. The ADU market, even now, is still kind of a boutique market. It's homeowner here, homeowner there. There really aren't any scalable solutions. So we thought if we can bring a scalable solution, then the market does actually get big.
And what are kind of the hurdles on this? Is it the financing? Is it the construction? Is it both? In terms of the hurdle of getting that?
It's kind of everything. So you have, let's just start, on the construction side, you have constructing a small structure in a tight space, a lot of times on existing property, so you don't have a lot of room to work with.
You can't get equipment back.
Exactly. And you're usually the projects are custom, so every time you're reinventing the wheel, you're reinventing the permitting process, so you lose efficiencies there. And then on the financing side, there really is no reliable source of financing for homeowners aside from home equity loans. So homeowners who don't have a lot of equity, they may want an ADU. There may be demand for ADU. They may have the perfect ADU in mind, but without financing, it's just not going to happen. Right. And we think that is actually the number one impediment to growing the market.
Got it. In terms of zoning and regulations, things have happened here in the state in terms of zoning. Yeah, we've seen it in Washington and California. Kind of maybe shine some light on that of where we are. Can anybody do an ADU? What's the restriction or lack thereof to do that? Yeah,
it used to be that there were a handful of cities that were kind of ahead of the game, Portland obviously being one of them. And so they had opened up their zoning to allow ADUs. And so you saw a lot of ADU development in pockets in places like Portland and other cities. I think as the housing crisis unfolded, people started to look at it as a broader solution. And you had state legislatures say, we're tired of waiting around for individual cities to figure it out. So first California, then Oregon, now Washington, they all passed legislation which gave every homeowner the right to build one ADU within certain parameters. So now every city has to allow that, and then it's just a matter of how they, what other things they add on, how aggressive they want to be in promoting development. But you have there's never been a time like this. Up and down the West Coast, for the first time, the opportunity to build an ADU has been opened up from a zoning perspective, and so I think we're just beginning to see what's going to happen as a result.
Gotcha.
Of that.
Now, locally, we've heard things here, in terms of groups fighting density. Portland's kind of unique in terms of the number of single-family homes and neighborhoods close to the core, and there's this kind of, we've got historic districts and things like that where there's this fight on density. Is with the state overriding, is that an opening it up where there's less of an opposition?
In Portland, it really was it was already figured out. But you brought up a good point. There are still pockets where you can't develop an ADU, or at least the path to developing an ADU is significantly harder. So historic districts are an obvious case where, in order to get an ADU done, you have to create a design that matches the historic standards for that neighborhood. And we don't need to get into the pros and cons of historic
Right.
districts, but it ends up being a tax on ADUs in those districts because it's just more expensive
To do it,
develop an
right.
ADU. So you have that, and then you have some other design districts where you do have to meet certain standards. And then outside of Portland, where you have planned communities, you still have those restrictions. So the state law doesn't override
CCNRs and things of that.
Yeah, so HOAs. So that's still an area that I think more work needs to be done to figure out. How do we override those restrictions without taking away the authority of those communities to regulate the things they really want to regulate?
Got it. And then I was curious, just on kind of my education on it, is there like a size where once you get bigger than this on ADU, it becomes not an ADU, it's a second, I don't know which way to call it.
It's a fascinating, we could spend way too much time on this. ADU is really a legal definition or a planning definition. It really doesn't, because you have tiny homes, you have 800 square foot homes, right?
I got homes with wheels on it.
So it's easier just to say that in most communities there's a maximum size of an ADU.
Okay.
And that's like in Portland, it's 800 square feet. A lot of communities are at that 800 square foot range. I think Seattle might be going up to 1,000 square feet. But basically they're just saying, whatever it is, it can't be bigger than this. And then usually it's tied to some relationship to the primary house.
Gotcha.
Or the size of the lot. So it's either 800 square feet or 75% of the size of the house, or you can only have 40%
Coverage
of the
area.
Exactly.
Got it. Okay.
So that's really the way. And just to fill in the rest, an ADU can refer to a basement apartment. It can refer to an attic apartment, a garage conversion, and a detached structure.
So it's not just a detached structure.
No.
It's just adding another.
It is another legal unit that you can rent out. It has a separate address. It's a separately permitted unit. You can get at it in any way. A lot of people have great old garages that really lend themselves well. That's the most direct path to get an ADU.
Gotcha. So now your firm, Wellers, was getting, I read some on about, doing kind of building the ADU off-site, bringing it kind of the ease of getting these developed. Maybe you can kind of explain a little bit about kind of how that works. And
So as I mentioned up front, we looked at the market and saw these obstacles, and so we tried to create a business model that would directly address these primary obstacles. So the first one was both the complexity of constructing a small structure in a small area. So we thought it lent itself really well to modular construction or factory built units. Right. So we built all of our units off-site. So that we definitely save time, and it drives the cost way down. You just get efficiencies in the production of the units that you lose when you're building on site. So so that's one of the key things we do is we're only on someone's property for about 6 to 8 weeks.
Really?
Tops.
Really? Wow.
Because while we're waiting for a permit, we're in our factory, the company we work with is building the unit, and then it comes fully constructed, and then we go on a property, and 10 days later we show up with a crane and drop it on, and then
you're just doing the site work, doing the pad and the utilities.
Exactly.
Okay.
So it's a dramatically different process for the homeowner. And obviously it allows us to do more units and other companies who utilize the same technology. So we think it has benefits for everybody to do things that way.
Now, is that done? Are there other companies doing the same thing up and down the West Coast in California?
Yeah. So I think what's great is there are a variety of companies that are using modular processes to build a lot of cool ADUs, really great designs and whatnot. But they vary in price and whatnot. And then the other part of it is kind of the installation, if you will. So we are a turnkey company. That's one of the things that we wanted to be, is we go to the homeowner, and once again, if I go back to the pain points the homeowner has, we want to take all those away. And so we say, here's our ADU, but what you're buying from us really is the solution, the service.
How to get it here.
We get it in and whatnot. A lot of the modular builders are selling really great units, but you still you're buying from them. It's just like the old Sears model, right? You're buying it online.
You got to figure out how to get it on.
Exactly. You have to hire a local contractor and permitting. And so that's typically what you're seeing. But there are companies like ours that do the whole process. And so once again, I think that's great for the market. It's just going to make it easier for homeowners to access this opportunity.
And I know another kind of barrier for a lot of homeowners in this was financing. I mean, how that works, and is, in terms of from an existing home loan, is there an issue in putting an ADU? It's not, is it changing? I mean, it's improving the security, the house, but do lenders have the ability to say, no, we don't want to do that there? Or is that?
No, it's really just it's the way that homes are valued. The appraisal process, the mortgage lending process is all set up for a single family property, has a house on it and maybe a garage and some backyard improvements. And then you jump into the category of duplexes, triplexes, so the single family property is just treated differently. So all of a sudden you drop another structure on there. In many cases that's earning income. The system's not set up to properly value that. And so appraisers don't really have the ability to value it properly. They have to look for other similar sales, other comparables. And then lenders have a hard time, do I count the income or not? So what you're seeing is that a homeowner goes to a lender with a very rational project, right? I want to put this here so I can rent it out and earn X, or I want to put it there so I can house my mother who has income herself. And they just don't have the tools to properly value it, so they can't independently finance it. I mean, that's a simplified way of talking about it. I think there's a lot of different things in play, but that's basically the issue. Is we just need more time, more properties having ADUs, more of those properties selling, and everybody involved in that process.
Kind of getting a comfort level.
Property that was worth $300,000 is now worth $450,000. They can see that it's documented, so now they know that if somebody puts an ADU in, then they know lending against that poses this level of risk.
Well, even in our world, with even you're starting to see a little bit of modular construction of multifamily, but it's interesting. You talk to the developers, they're saying it's saying quality, you've got more control over it. Some of the problem is the city inspectors aren't used to it. They don't know what they're So it's this educational process of how do you get them there. And it's been interesting to hear how, you think, oh, it's a great plan, but you forget of all the other steps to get there, and people have to get comfortable. So how many ADUs are, so in Portland, any single family home could have an ADU? In theory.
By zoning, yes. But physically, no. I mean, the different estimates have the number of properties that are suitable for an ADU, anywhere from 70,000 to 100,000 in the city of Portland alone.
Okay.
And the 70,000 number is the city's data, and then Portland State University took another look at it and added a number of filters, and so that's a pretty good estimate. People forget, like if you show the satellite view and you look around Portland, especially as you go east, there's backyards everywhere. People forget like how much space sits in our backyard. So when you look at that, it's not surprising that you really can add thousands of housing units just on the existing land that we have. We already have, probably close to 3,000 ADUs, that we know of right
here
now.
Within the city.
Yeah, within the city of Portland. So it's already a pretty mature market, but we think the city can absorb another probably 10,000 ADUs.
The first kind of early adopters in this, is it more of an added rental, or is it more I've got a mother-in-law or my parents want to come in, or do you have any sense of that?
Yeah, I mean, once again, we're kind of a mature market here in Portland, so I do think you see everything. I would say that some of the early ADUs were driven more as DIY and folks in the development profession, architects, contractors who really, they could figure out this maze. I think, as it's matured, it's become a lot more attainable for folks. So I think you're seeing the people who need a living space.
Right.
So that's definitely a sizable chunk. But then you have the whole folks who are looking for income. And, truth be told, the growth of Airbnb, I think, accelerated
kind of
a lot of the ADU development. So much so that the city actually changed the fee structure so that you can't get a fee waiver from the city and do short-term rental. But I do think a lot of ADUs got built because the economics made so much sense with the short-term rental versus long-term rental. So I think those are the two big buckets. And we talk to hundreds of homeowners, and so we see that whole range. People looking for income, people looking for extra space, the multi-generational, I own a house, my kids are moving out, I don't want to sell my house, so I'll downsize into the ADU, I'll rent out my house, or I might build it, rent it out, but I know that in 10 years I'm going to have an aging parent who's going to need housing.
So what do we do?
We're seeing it all, and people really are getting creative about how to use their property for all of these purposes.
And is there I know, like you said, Oregon's an early adopter. Are there other cities in the United States, or that you see this kind of even more further along than what you've seen here?
Oh, I really do think Portland is
Yeah.
as far out ahead as any city in the country. The model that everybody points to is actually Vancouver, BC.
Right.
So in Vancouver, BC, and every market has its unique kind of physical characteristics, but the research that's been done suggests that Vancouver, a third of all residential properties in Vancouver have some kind of second unit.
Within the, really?
Yeah. So that's 30+%. I think in Portland we might be up to about 2 or 3%, and then places go down. Wow. So Portland is really at the forefront, and then you have some California cities that did it on their own. I mean, cities were free to do it on their own. So Santa Cruz and a couple other places, but right now in California, just the sheer scale. Once the state law changed, LA had 5,000 ADU applications last year alone, just in the city of Los Angeles. And you see not similar, but proportionate numbers in San Francisco, San Jose, places like that. So quickly we're going to see, all the big cities of California are going to have thousands of ADUs, and they could be getting to 10,000 before.
Because the state has the ability to say, hey, you've got to allow these to come in.
And the demand is
huge.
It's massive, and and I think the economics are even better. So you put an ADU in, the rent you're going to be able to charge on a market rate basis could be twice what you're going to be charging here. So the economics just
play that.
quickly.
Okay.
Now the construction costs are higher. You have a lot of other things going on, but California really is building ADUs at a faster rate than Oregon is. Washington and then the state and Seattle both just changed their zoning. Like Seattle just signed this new code this week. So, that's a good case study to watch.
So will you go to Seattle, or is you guys more?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think we'd love to be there. We'd love to be in Seattle. We'd love to be in California. We're trying to get to a certain scale here in Portland and make sure that we know kind of our entire process. We'd like to get a little bit more financing options for homeowners in place. Okay. So that when we go into a market, we know, because that really is a big driver of demand for us is, if we talk to a given homeowner, we may have the ADU they want. We might be ready to agree on something, but if they don't have financing, it's not going anywhere. Okay. So we really are working with a handful of lenders here to see if we can get them, just kind of push them a little further and give them a little bit more experience, so that then we can either they'll come to those markets with us, or we'll be able to show other lenders, look, these lenders did.
This is what they
these
did.
kind of second mortgage, or they use this process to appraise it. So.
And then, are any municipalities talking about incentives or anything in terms of giving the homeowner the incentive to try to do that, to alleviate some of the affordability issues that we're having in the market?
The number one incentive, once you've dealt with the zoning, the number one incentive that is out there is SDC fees, impact fees. Okay. So the city of Portland, probably 10 years ago, started waiving system development charges for ADUs. And that was for this very reason. They said, what else can we do to encourage ADU development? And so, on a per unit basis in Portland, that's about $15,000 of savings. So if you look at the permit data, it just shakes up, right? So when we look around, so back to this question about cities now they're obligated to allow you to build an ADU, but they're not obligated to waive their fees. So communities right here in our area, just across the line from Portland, you go from no SDC fees to $15,000 or $20,000. So the same ADU costs that much more, and you're not getting higher rent. So that's a big impediment, or conversely, it's a big opportunity for communities
that are giving that,
to be able to say, okay, here's how we can incentivize this. And my plug on this is, and I didn't make this up, but those fees are charged based on kind of estimated impact on streets and sidewalks and sewers and water and parks. And we know that these are smaller households, they drive less, they're using existing facilities, so they really do have a smaller impact. So there's a strong argument to be made that they certainly shouldn't be burdened with the same level of fees as a regular housing unit. So,
which we've talked about even with the city in terms of even multifamily. You're looking at STC charges per unit on multifamily comparable to what you're doing on single family. And
Right.
That just does not,
Exactly.
it doesn't equate. I'm
Yeah.
building a 100 unit, yes, there's some, usage and all that, but does it equate to what you're doing when you're building a, 3,000 square foot house?
Yeah.
And hoping to get some leeway on that. Is
Yeah,
there
the cost,
other-
the cost can be prohibitive.
Yeah, is there other costs for the homeowners that, like, I know was talk about property taxes. I mean, have they kind of figured out how to do that? Or
Yeah, I mean, I think there was a little bit of be kind of feeling out by the assessor's office on kind of how they wanted to treat it, but now it seems pretty predictable. It's the ADU was assessed as an improvement,
Okay.
and then it's added to the tax bill, so it does increase your taxes, but
Right.
it doesn't cause your tax bill to get reassessed.
So it's not a full reassessment of the whole property?
No,
right?
and,
Okay.
and so, so I think that's fair. I mean,
Right.
it's a value, it's generating income, it should add value to the property. So, and frankly, to the extent that the assessors get some consistency on how they're valuing it, hopefully then the lenders can see, look,
right.
they're looking at it in a particular way. So there's that cost. It's good to point out that when you, like any project in a property, when we tap into existing sewer line, existing water line, existing electrical service, anything that's substandard or that's out of date,
It's gonna have to
oftentimes you're like, okay, now you gotta repair your sewer line or upgrade your water meter. So those things do pop up on a handful of our projects.
And speaking of utilities, are these separately metered? Are they?
No, so the typical way an ADU works is you share existing sewer and water service on the property. We typically, and I think it's a pretty standard way, add a second meter for electrical service to the property. So
Okay.
so it's one service onto the property, and then there's
Splits.
2 meters, and so we have separately metered service, and then we can run separate cable connection and whatnot.
Right.
But typically you're sharing water service and sewer service. And even garbage. Garbage is like a single household.
Right, that stays
thing.
in.
So whether you're renting it out, you have to or not, you have to figure out how to prorate that, and so there's different ways to do
Right,
that.
we've, I know a lot of our clients have done the same thing. I was just
Right.
curious, and usually it doesn't, even on multifamily, it doesn't make sense to do an individual, you just utility meter for each one, there's sub-metering, but again, there's a master
Right.
meter and there's some of that going
Yeah.
on, so.
And yes, you can pay the city to install dedicated water service, dedicated sewer
can.
service, but the cost difference is significant, and so it usually doesn't make sense, and it's not necessary. Most residential properties are kind of overbuilt in terms of sewer and water, so
Right.
they have the capacity for additional people, additional users.
And is there anything changing in the future in terms of design of ADUs? I mean, is it just kind of depends, everybody has their own kind of fancy what they want?
Well, I do think that as this new single-family zoning takes hold and you begin to think through what it means to have 1 to 4 units possible on a property, I do think people will begin to think about the different permutations of that. So duplexes with ADUs or 2 ADUs or a basement, right? And so I think it's going to change, and I'm truly just throwing this out there, but you could have the double ADU as one structure kind of thing. I mean, so there could be, so I think it's gonna be more along maximizing how you take advantage of that ability to go up to 4 units rather than, I mean, I think there's already, design innovation is happening all the time. Anybody who's watching this can go and Google modular ADU, and you're gonna not only see a lot of different companies, but if you click on images, you'll
Full
see,
gamut.
yeah, or Pinterest. I mean, people send me Pinterest. Like, there's all these incredible designs. So the design side is really taking care of itself. It's really now, I think it's about efficiency, maximizing density, and driving down cost are the places for innovation that we need to get at for ADUs. Because ADUs right now are still, they're prohibitively expensive.
They are still.
Yeah, I mean, in Portland, we are saying typical detached ADU is $175,000, $200,000. You go to California.
That's all in? 175 roughly?
Yeah,
depending on
so
special design.
so ours are lower than that, but 175 is really kind of a basic, structure. But if you do any kind of upgrades, it gets in 200 pretty quickly. In Seattle and California, they're over 300,000.
Wow, okay.
So it's expensive, and that it impacts the economics. So if we want the ADU to do what we think it can do in terms of adding housing and adding affordable housing and bringing income to homeowners, we got to bring the cost down so that there's something dropping to the bottom line
Right.
at the end of the day.
Which typically is going to come once you've got more people are buying into it. You've got a bigger mechanism to go around there. And like I said, hopefully municipalities will maybe look at the benefit of this is not easy. I mean, nothing's easy, but a way to bring some affordable housing in. Probably a lot faster from start to finish without some of the disruptions that we have on the other things. We've all talked about. Without more supply, we're going to have. I mean, even with all the cranes we have in Portland, we still have immigration coming here.
Oh yeah, the supply is going to get absorbed, and then we're going to be back
right where we were before. And some of the regulations that have been put in, I think in terms of idea thinking, you're helping, but I think if you start preventing from costs to things like that, in terms of building supply, capital goes somewhere else. I mean, without capital, it's really tough to bring any supply here. So, well, great. It was great to hear the story. And if anybody wants any more information, you can go to the website.
Yeah, just go to our website and dweller.com, and we're happy to do assessments of properties and let you know if your property is suited for an ADU, and talk about our process. It's we try to make it so the homeowner doesn't have to learn our business. We want it to be like any other product where you come to us and you're buying a service, and so just send us your name and contact information and maybe your address, and we can take it from there.
Perfect. Well, great. Thanks again for coming. We'll see you again on HFO-TV. Thank you.
Our entire office specializes in multifamily real estate, making HFO the largest multifamily brokerage in the Pacific Northwest. Your success is our passion. Build your legacy with HFO. Call 503-241-5541 or visit our website at hfore.com for more information.